Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for this lunchtime conversation. Thank you to the WJW for hosting this conversation, the Committee of Women Writers for supporting this program, and our amazing diversity department for working so hard on the event. And of course, our two illustrious guests for taking time out of their busy schedule to join us in conversation. A few things before we start. There are three moderators today. They are Liz Catone, Sarah Fahey, and myself, Natalia Vekic. We've worked really hard to create a seamless event, but are beholden to technology, as always. If we face any technical difficulties, please be patient with us. We'll spend the last 10 to 15 minutes of our time together fielding questions from the audience in the Q&A text box. So if you have any questions, please don't put them in the chat. Put them in the Q&A text box and we'll do our best to address them. Without any further ado, welcome Carly Mensch and Liz Flahive, the co-creators, executive producers, and showrunners of Roar, a new genre-bending surreal anthology series that weaves together 8 feminist fables adapted from a short story collection by Cecelia Ahern. This is their follow-up to the very much beloved TV series Glow, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. They have both had long, successful careers as screenwriters on shows like Nurse Jackie, Orange is the New Black, and Weeds, and Homeland. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we can kick off the conversation. To give our conversation a little shape, I'm going to start with talking about your collaboration together as writers. Obviously, we're at the Guild. There are tons of writers here who really wanted to know about your collaboration, how it started, and can you talk about when you started and met and started working together, if you had any ground rules around your collaboration?
We should. Maybe we should have. It was, so it was pretty in its way like organic. Carly and I met in a playwriting group before we had ever worked in television at this little theater called Ars Nova in 2006 or 7, something like that. And so that was the first time we'd read each other's work, discussed each other's work, discussed other people's work.
We were playwrights who never thought about writing with other people. And then we both went on in our TV careers similarly, not thinking about writing with a partner. Liz went first. Liz was on Nurse Jackie for all 7 seasons. I went on to Weeds. And then Liz, when I think it was season 5, when she finally had some hiring power at Nurse Jackie based on some staffing changes, brought me into Nurse Jackie. And I think that's where it started in terms of 2 people sitting in a writer's room together, having the same realization at the same time that we had a really good, not just working relationship, but both kind of similar sensibilities, similar approaches to being in a room,
but very different brains. I think like part of the thing that's always, even from those early days working in a room together, and part of the reason I really wanted Carly on staff with me was that, I knew how generous she was creatively, what a big brain she was. And even though we'd never been in a room together, it felt very clear that, we would be able to, she would be a great asset to the room.
Also just like things started happening, such as whenever I struggled with the scene, it just felt like a natural impulse to walk to Liz's office and be like, hey, I don't know, I'm stuck on the scene. Can I spitball with you? Playwrights who've been in the muck together and in writers groups together have seen each other's work at like really early stages. So being vulnerable with someone, I think was a little bit easier for us. That said, it was like a kind of burgeoning discovery in the moment of like, oh, I'm really enjoying. Liz has been my friend for a while. She's a playwright whose work I like. It's pretty different. Liz is a lot more grounded than I was at the time as a writer, but we do seem to approach from, even though they're different places, we're kind of going after the same thing, and we're both having kind of similar work ethics, which was also really, I don't know. It was like both of us coming into work having stayed up the night before, bothered by the same general thing. Like I really feel like the ending's out for like that character's arc is really it's really, I went and did a bunch of research because I still think we don't have it.
Yeah, we weren't trying to outwork each other, but it was hard to outwork each other.
Yeah.
And there's like a real comfort in that, especially when it was the first time I was ever on EP, and to have somebody come in, and we had a few writers on staff like this, but Carly was definitely a person who would like show up an hour early being like, hey, can we just like talk about this before we go into the room? I just have some things to like talk through, which is a great energy when you're trying to, you know, figure out the puzzle of the season to have meet you at the door.
And then again, in trying to like retrace our steps, I don't think it was like, do you want to be my writing partner? And it was like, the first question was, do you want to make a show together? Which just felt like a kind of fun, like we're already in a kind of shared brain space. It felt like an extension of our friendship, like we should just make a show together. Which again, then the next logical step, which we didn't take right away, was like, that means you write a script together.
Well, it means first you find a thing you actually want.
First you find a thing, and Liz and I, again, different brain people. So it took a while kind of with the Venn diagram overlap of like, would you want to live in this world? Would you want to live in this world? And then, I sent Liz the doc for Glow. And I feel like I think I came over to your house.
And you're like, it's like, I just had my second kid and we watched it together and we were like, yeah, this is something.
This is a world. And it kind of had a lot of things that both of us like that are different. Like, I think Liz was really moved by the kind of the women looking back on their time and this being a really meaningful activity for them. And I was probably far more attracted to the bananas insanity of wrestling. And as a just kind of a place to think for a while. And we wrote that pilot, and then I feel like we've been open about this before, but then, you know, it takes a while between writing a pilot and then actually the first season of a show. You get back in the room, usually like a year later, year and a half later, if you're lucky. And we had forgotten how we wrote that pilot together. You know, people,
because we weren't at the same time like writing a million different scripts like together. Like, that was the pilot we
weren't a team. We just did this one script and then had to kind of figure out what our working process and relationship would be. And our first discovery was like, oh, we never sit at a computer together. Like Liz and I are never, this frame is rare.
Not what the computer sees.
So that was like the first very basic discovery we had, which was we don't want to literally write together. We both like to write separately. But I think one of the ground rules that was unspoken and is now spoken for us is we hand each other pages. Usually we split up a script, each write our own pages.
Just to back up, we outline together fully.
Then split up scenes, go our separate ways, trade pages, and the other person can do whatever they want to those pages. Like if I hand Liz pages and she rewrites every word of them, that's totally fine.
And vice versa. Like we're not precious about what we hand
not
the other
precious
person.
I think we're both kind of like, whoever nails the scene gets to nail the scene. There are scripts that one of us nails more than the other. There are some times where we forget who wrote what. But I think that's kind of the like, I love Liz's writing. I want Liz's writing everywhere.
And I don't think it would work otherwise. Like I think for both of us, it would be hard to feel like the freedom that I think we feel writing together if we felt hemmed in by the other person. At least I think for our personalities, I just do not see it working. We're like, oh God, like, can I not touch that thing? Like,
But I think in terms of like ground rules, that's kind of like our most core tenet, which is the kind of full respect for each other. And also we both have full autonomy, which means sometimes it takes longer because it's like you rewrote it, then I rewrote it, then you rewrote it, and you're like, where am I? And then I think similarly, when we go into, you know, meetings, I think there are a lot of teams that split up duties and someone's maybe more on set and someone's more in the room. And Liz and I are the exact opposite, where we both just do everything together because we're such different people that we like the benefit of two brains in one place.
We're both more fun.
Yeah, it's definitely more fun. And we're both very opinionated. So like any one time I don't go to a costume meeting with Liz, I'm like, oh, I know Liz is gonna have it. We're gonna have to do this meeting all over again because I know she's gonna have an opinion about the thing that I just went on a rant about.
So it's like slightly more annoying and still more efficient if we both are sort of just being like the sort of two-headed monster that we are in terms of production and scripts and everything. But I feel like the truth to me is like it gets a script to a better place faster if our two brains are both on it. Like we can, even if certain steps take us longer, I feel like the route to like a finished piece of work is.
And I don't think I've ever heard either one of us be like, "You didn't like my line."
Yeah, ever. Like, don't.
You deleted it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
normally,
but sometimes
like, if a line is good, we usually agree. We're
always
always like, I'm gonna try to save that joke.
Yeah, I can
of yours, but like I can't deal with the beginning of this scene.
Yeah.
Like we're very.
I will work hard to save that moment.
Yeah.
With that.
Because we like a lot of the same. I mean, I think we like a lot of the same kind of writing. I think I think our taste level is pretty similar. I also think like we will do a lot of in terms of ground rules, which I think is also sort of unspoken, but like we'll talk about in a general way how we responded to something the other person did. We won't ever just be like under cover of darkness, like rewriting something. We'll be like, hey, I read it. I think it's great. I'm sorry. I think I'm going to redo this scene. And we're always like, great. Like it doesn't,
we both want
great.
The best script. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think there's a kind of check your ego.
Yeah. But there is a communication about
that has gotten better, and Liz has called me on it, so I feel fine saying that I was the one who had to work on communication more than Liz, such as when I told her when she rewrote a scene for the Glow pilot that she always said, yeah, good, just better. Do it better.
That's an amazing response to someone's writing.
Amazing note to get from your partner.
Yeah.
So obviously I got bumped off of our Zoom and had to find another place to jump on. So let me know if this question is redundant, because obviously I was running around trying to relog onto Zoom. I guess like in terms of your collaboration now has lasted longer than most marriages. And, you talked a little bit towards the end about the evolution of that. Did you cover that in your conversation? Like from the beginning and the lessons that you've learned together in a collaboration and how it's evolved over time?
I think we touched it a little. I think marriage is always the right word to come back to. Like it's like a marriage where there's a core of respect and just a simple, like, we really like each other. We like each other's writing. We like hanging out together. And anytime that we're in danger of violating one of those, you check yourself.
Yeah.
You need tons of communication. It takes work. Like I know that if I'm a dick to Liz, we're not gonna have a good day working. So why would I be a dick to Liz other than say like, I totally know why you wrote that scene that way. We talked about it that way. I'm so sorry. I think we need to throw it out. You don't come in being like,
we're very human to each other. I think that's just how we are. Because I think we really like being friends and working together, and it's easy. It's gotten easier and easier, I think, for both of us. And then I think there are things like, like features, which is a whole nother part of our writing partnership that is a totally different thing for us. But something that I think initially I had a lot more hunger for
in our marriage,
both creatively and financially.
I was like, Liz, go sleep with other people in the film industry because I don't want to write movies. And now I'm writing movies with my wife.
That's right. So I'm like, I'll totally I'll make our marriage with other feature people. And then Carly's like, oh, what's going on?
That looks fun. What are you doing?
Yeah.
I like that story.
Yeah,
okay.
Just
So you have an open relationship, basically,
on the feature side.
On the feature side,
we're pretty
monogamous on the TV side.
A third can come into the marriage, but one of us can't leave.
Yeah.
So just to change the course a little bit, we're obviously here to talk about your latest series, Roar. Congratulations on the series.
Thank you.
I'm really intrigued because it comes from a story collection of 30 stories. What was that first story that pulled you in? That was the aha moment of, we really want to do this. Was there that moment? Can you talk about that a little bit?
I don't think it was one story, but there was a story that I feel like the comedy is, we didn't put it in the anthology, but it was one of the ones that kind of stuck and that we talked about and kind of demonstrated the stickiness of the book to us. Which is, there was a story about shame where a woman farts on a stage and then falls into a shame hole.
And there are other women collected in the shame hole.
And we just
that she falls into, and we love that conceit, and we were like, oh, that's great.
Like, I don't know how to stretch that into
an episode
that's not a one-act play.
Yeah.
That I would have been happy to write at the Fringe Festival at the beginning of my career. That would have been like the dreamiest setup, and now it's like, oh, that's a challenge. I don't totally know how to do it, but I think there was a kind of general sense, and we were saying before, that like it's really hard for Liz and I to find projects that we both like. Like that is not that process. That we both look out for different things. We tend to have a yin and a yang. So like if someone's having a strong reaction, it's not rare for the other person to be like, what? And usually in the debate comes something new and exciting. And this was a book that, again, I don't think we both read and said like, we have to adapt this. I think we both read and went our separate ways and was like, how would we even do that? Like and I think a challenge is something that kind of speaks to both of us, and that kind of, if we don't know how to do it, it's going to stick with both of us.
Yeah, if you feel a little freaked out by it, it's helpful. I think the first story in the collection, which is one that
Bite Marks is
definitely the first one. We were like, let's write that.
Yeah.
We both have young kids. At the time of writing the first draft, I had 2 little kids. At the time of making the actual episode, Carly had 2 young kids. So I feel like that felt very, we felt connected to that personally for sure.
Yeah.
And so I think that was, in terms of like in like a proof of concept-y script kind of a way, that was probably the one that we first put on the page.
I just think it's funny that you went to the one that we emotionally connected with, and I was like, remember that funny one that we kept talking about, like, chewing on? How would we make a woman fall?
But I think that's the thing. Like, I think we have, we had to kind of kick the tires in terms of like, would this book continue to sort of bear fruit? Like, could we? And I think the other thing we sort of figured out from there was, as we pulled in writers, we had a totally different process with writers, where we sent Janine and Hallie and Vera, all producers and writers on the show, we sent them the book and asked them to read the whole book and pull out the stories that they responded to the most, and then sort of winnowed it down from there, because we definitely knew that to have these feel like voicey and singular, and that there was real ownership from the writer's side, that we needed to make sure they had sort of a similar experience to what we had writing scripts. And then obviously we as showrunners stepped back and looked at the balance of stories, ideas, tone, protagonists, and made sure we were making a whole anthology.
That story has such a visceral impact. I mean, I don't know if I should give away too much, but it's just, there are moments in it that are so visceral and really pull at you because of what the woman is going through in terms of her own process, like relationship to motherhood, her relationship to how the world around her is treating her around that. It's a really great episode.
Thanks.
I guess the characters on the show, speaking of the writers that you brought in, come from different backgrounds, life experiences, ages. Like, there's a real range and diversity of experiences. And I'm just wondering, how did you find the right voices to tell these particular stories? Like, you talked about the writers picking their own stories in a way. So if you could talk about bringing in the writers, looking for the right voices for these stories, and why you made that decision. Because I read too that you actually had them read the stories and then went with the ones they connected to.
That's correct.
Which is, this whole process was counter to everything we had ever done in television. We're used to a far more kind of traditional writer's room. And I think that our approach, a lot of it was dictated by the material, which was like, these are some very singular stories, but these stories are very spare. There's a lot of room for a writer here. There's a lot of room for a voice, and there's a lot of room for character development. But in general, like, a writer has to bring a lot to these stories, because this is kind of like almost like a writing prompt, and a title, and then a kind of go forth.
Yeah, it's not in terms of an adaptation.
Yeah,
it's a heavy lift, because many of the stories give you some of them are, like 6 pages.
Yeah.
So
we're like, we definitely kind of started just by narrowing our search to kind of who are writers who can take a very spare concept and kind of build their own episode from that. And both because, frankly, COVID, like we knew that we couldn't physically all sit together and that we were going to have a far more focused writer's room, one-on-one with each writer. That we just really needed some more upper level writers than we're used to. Far more of a grab bag in a writer's room, and that's kind of the joy. And I think this time we were like, we need people who can do some more heavy lifting, who maybe can even produce their episodes from day one to day end. And again, who like can imagine can take a very spare writing prompt and kind of turn it into something a lot larger, which is why our brains first went to playwrights. Just having a theater background, it felt like a very kind of theatery exercise. So Janine and Hallie are just 2 playwrights whose work we love, who we've been trying to work with for a while. And then frankly, the other thing that tends to connect us to writers is they're really funny writers. They're really funny women who can do that.
They can write like deep character, they can handle story, but there is always humor, even in sort of the darkest of circumstances. And Hallie and Vera, their material outside of TV, their plays, the shows they've written on, it all sort of lends itself to that tone that we love.
Yeah, they can write dramatic, dramatic and funny, which is, those are the unicorns we tend to look for anyway. But so we started with them, and then Vera was the third that we added. And Vera we knew from kind of the Genji Kohan world. She was working on Orange is the New Black. We'd always loved her writing. I think we tried to hire her on Glow, and then Orange got her that same season. We've just been looking for an opportunity to work with Vera, and
also like these women are all at like sort of a showrunner creator level. Like Vera had just come off of running 10/15. She would like Janine was about to go make her own pilot. So like we were grabbing people. We're like, just come do this for this time. Like it's not as long of a commitment.
Yeah, we kind of knew it
which was nice. So I do think it's like we had a little bit more focus time with them, but also, that was that was the one. Making an anthology is so hard, but that was a benefit in terms of how we structured.
And then frankly, everything. Like we may have, like in terms of why we only went for 3, like I was pregnant. I remember we had a kind of clock. We had like a running clock of like, how fast can we turn these around before Carly disappears, and what's the most efficient. And, sometimes it's like, it's the most efficient. Liz and I taking the extra episode or 2 was kind of the added, I feel like the actual reason for why. That was like how much we could kind of fit in the schedule. And then we had to disappear for a little. And what was manageable for me and us.
Yeah, we also needed all those scripts done ahead of time because our production was cast contingent. So we needed scripts. Not only was Carly pregnant, there was a pandemic, and blah, blah, blah. But we had to get these scripts out to actors so we could get actors. So then Apple would fully
greenlight. So there was a lot of
there are different pressures,
strategies that we went into why we chose, like the way we chose. Yeah.
But a lot of what you're looking for is really that flexibility in terms of writers, and like taking on all these different voices is like really a writer's voice, and that balance that I hear between comedy and the darkness and really being good at character and
like good at everything.
Yeah. Good at everything.
Who's good at everything?
Yeah.
You explore marriage, motherhood, women's invisibility, violence against women, women's friendship in various episodes. And I read a great kind of New York Times episode interview with you where the writer called out the specific thing. You allow room for your characters to have complex relationships with themselves and in their relationships. And I'm just wondering what draws you to writing these really messy characters, and how do you know when you get it right?
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
the first is easier, which is I feel like, again, like starting with our plays until now, like we're people who are bored by not messy people. So as a viewer and as writers are kind of excited to not just make it messy, but make it feel real and human. And to be real and human, in our eyes always means messy.
Yeah,
but maybe that's where we are.
No, and I think it's also, I don't know, I personally always like if a character is really like trying and, you know, I mean, trying and failing is kind of like favorite, but I do think like there's something about just watching, you know, I think we both have a real sort of like humanistic aim in our writing. So I do think, in addition to sort of like the tone, I think it also meshes with the tone that we're trying to achieve.
I also feel like at the beginning of Glow we talked more like this, but I feel like back then a lot of our feelings were like, men always get those parts. Like, why do men get the super messy, complicated psychological roles, and then the women are there's, you know, exposition wives? Like, that's annoying, and let's be part of the solution.
Let's change that.
Now it feels like there's like a much healthier balance, and now it feels just kind of where we're excited to live, and where we do live in our real lives. Like, we're the people who show up to school drop off and are like, whoa, those people really took a shower this morning. They look really together.
That's just physically messy.
I guess just to follow up on that, it's like those kind of big ideas that I mentioned. I mean, one thing is the characters, but another thing as writers is taking those on. Like, what is your, that's pretty big. Like, there's that responsibility feels big, getting it right feels big. Like, how do you kind of address that, like when you're writing and in your creative process?
We're really not ever trying to push political agendas through our work. But that said, we are people who can recognize the responsibility of having the soapboxes that we do. But again, a lot of these stories never start with like here's something I really think is important to put in the show. Here's something I really think is necessary for the conversation right now. I think a lot of these are just common stories that happen to women. So they come up when you're kind of cycling through different circumstances and psychologies and things that feel, you know, I think Duck is the perfect example where in no way did we approach this series saying we need to take on kind of these toxic.
We didn't come in being like, we want to tell a story of an abusive relationship, but I think when we were talking to Hallie and she read that story and we all had these different reactions to it, and her reaction was like, I hate it. We hadn't even considered making that an episode, and she was like, yeah, I just thought that Duck was like incredibly mansplainy and like toxic, and I just was like, what would it be like if she got into an emotionally abusive relationship with a duck? And you're like, we have no idea, let's try to break that story. So I think it's chasing things that feel exciting and authentic and scary. And that is sort of true of big ideas and big themes in like your relationship, when you're in therapy, when you're talking about your kids, when you're talking about friendships. You know, it's like if you're interested in that sort of kind of like high wire feeling, which I think is sort of the thing that continues to attract us both to like messy characters, to big ideas, to doing things in a different way, to not repeating ourselves. Like, I do think it is chasing, it's chasing those questions, it's chasing that feeling. And I think once you get something on the page, then you start to maybe ask questions of like, okay, well, as we tell this story, what are our responsibilities around the story? What is our responsibility in terms of producing this story? And, you know, it's like, I mean, I think responsibility is like a very unsexy word in terms of creativity, but I think it is something that is incredibly important and real, and something we talk about a lot. But I think if you talk about it at the starting line, you get freaked out. So I think you get I feel very hemmed in if somebody was like, well, but how are you being responsible telling that story? I'm like, I don't even know what the story is yet. So you just have to kind of get something down before you kind of ask those questions. I don't think we ever, which is all to say, I don't think we ever start from like, it is our responsibility to tell X.
Right. I'm wondering, speaking of the duck episode, which a lot of people have written about, what are some of the challenges you faced adapting these surrealist stories? Was there episodes that were uniquely challenging? I mean, you mentioned even at the beginning when you were reading the stories, one of the things that you thought about is like, how are we going to actually make these happen? Can you talk about that a little bit?
We can unfortunately talk about that for a very long time.
This is like our whiniest that we get. Like, we have it so good, and it's such a privilege to make these shows and tell these stories. And yet, this show was a bitch and nearly broke us. Mostly because, I mean, not mostly. There are so many. There's some kind of overarching challenges that then trickle into each individual episode. But the headline is, when you're making an anthology, you gain no institutional knowledge between episodes. So every challenge that you figure out how to overcome, you don't get to apply any of that to the next episode. You just get hit with new challenges that you're totally unprepared to handle. So kind of each episode took us down in a surprising and I would say unique way. Literally just I go in order of filming, which is just how I think. But I was like, we started with bite marks. It was the first episode we'd ever filmed. We had a bunch of challenges that just went from kind of the just any pilot the first time you film getting a crew together to, we had kind of all of the what was new for us. Horror was a new genre for us. So even just talking about how we were going to be filming this, how we were going to be doing the prosthetics for Cynthia. I'd say that was a surmountable challenge.
Totally.
Then we got hit by episode 2 is the horses episode, where we went out to the middle of the desert and there was a heat wave. So it was about 104 degrees in the desert.
It was 112.
112. Yeah, that sounds more right. I lost my mind at some point. I was wearing, ice under my hat and not really thinking about narrative so much. It's like, how can we protect everybody?
Yeah.
And then we're like, okay, this is just an accident. Like, we got a heat wave during the Western.
It'll be fine.
Then Liz went off to Australia.
Then I went to direct, and I was directing Duck. So that in our life partnership, normally we would be in 112 degree heat together, but instead I was working with 8 ducks, watching over their training and trying to figure out how I was going to technically achieve that episode. And then,
which took daily, again, like when you're in the middle of filming, like daily meetings about how are we technically training, what exactly are we asking the ducks to do, what can't they do, what should we be trying out in VFX,
which would be hard enough if you weren't also shooting a Western and prepping the next episode, none of which has anything to do with what you're doing. It's not like you can really use, again, like it's that institutional knowledge, like cliff you fall off because you're like, oh, we solved all these amazing problems with the duck isn't in the next episode. So
like that rig that we made, throw it out.
It doesn't matter.
And then Liz went off to Australia to
film Nicole's
episode, where in Australia literally COVID hit at the exact moment where, like, the night before we started filming, they lost all of their locations, which, I would consider that a pretty unfortunate filming hurdle.
It was very intense and everything. So, and like all the
this keeps happening, like these just each episode had a kind of like, you won't believe this. And I think the kind of
and I think the thing that was interesting was like we were trying to pull off a magic trick in each episode, and you felt how much work it takes to pull off a magic trick every episode. Just from not even talking about anything besides like the technical aspect. Everyone had like a very unique problem that we were like, what height should the shelf be that Betty Gilpin sits on? And do we green screen? Do we build it into an existing location?
And where's the camera go?
Where's the
we
camera?
Need a camera port to see her POV? How do we fit a camera through a real wall? Wait, now we need to build the wall. Wait, for building the wall, how do you hold enough weight that she's sitting on a shelf that's only this?
So I was like FaceTiming Carly from Australia, where I was editing the Duck episode and also prepping Nicole's episode. It was like looking at a shelf in Los Angeles. It was just like it's crazy to make a TV show. It's crazy to make 8 discrete episodes
in kind of genres you don't fully know that well. That each require some type of a production pre-prep, like the kind of story that like you would hopefully have like 8 weeks of discussions about, but now you're at like, okay, we can see coming down the pipeline, even though we just are still trying to solve this dark problem, is like that shelf, we should just start location scouting now. And so that script needs to be done solid.
That sounds like pretty overwhelming circumstances. I mean, at that moment, you guys are obviously leaning very much on each other and your collaboration, and
it did cause us to split up more than we're used to and comfortable with, and kind of revealed the I guess the hidden strength of having
two people.
A two-headed monster.
I think
we couldn't have done it if there was just one of us. Just again, we were filming in 2 continents at the same time. Like,
and we are all, and just to say, like, I think this is the other thing to say explicitly is like, we're always on set. Like one of us is always
from literally the first minute in the morning till the end of the day.
And I think that's also how you make sure, I mean, we were like this on Glow too, but I think it's also how you make sure your set is run the way you want. Like COVID makes it hard for sets to feel as joyful as they should, you just want to make sure you're, looking out for your people, looking out for your cast, looking out for your crew. Your crew is doing such a heavy lift, especially with an anthology. So I think that's the other thing it was good that there were 2 of us, even though it still beat us to a pulp. So.
I'm gonna in 2 minutes pass it on to our next moderator, but I wanted to just follow up with that. So since you're used to doing things together a lot, what were those hidden strengths that you figured out now that one was on another continent? Like what were those things that you figured out about yourself?
I discovered weaknesses. I
think one of you said strength, so I'm like trying to
remember them being like, you have to give a speech to the crew now about being more respectful to the COVID officers, and I'm like I need Liz, like, because I gotta go address the crew about I mean, I think the truth is we're like, look, we both know we can do the job by ourselves. Like, I think we're both like, we choose not to because I'm like, I can do this. It's just not as fun. Yeah. Like, I didn't like discover I could showrun. I was like, I've known all along that both of us could very easily run shows by ourselves, and I would like to believe very similarly, healthily run shows. But it's just a bummer to be in the muck alone. Yeah. It's a bummer to have to deal with the crises by yourself. There's so much of showrunning that's not sexy, as we were saying, that's about like at 11 o'clock at night, rewriting a script at the same time that you're like on an HR call about somebody, and some. So I do think transgression that you don't know how to deal with, or dealing with. Yeah, I think it's like this. I think it is one of those things where the managerial buoying and the creative support is something that like you get accustomed to, and it's helpful. It was like being reminded, like, I can be single. Yeah, it's like I'll be fine, but being left, it's like being left alone. I mean, I liken it being like left alone with my kids, and then my husband comes back. I'm like, awesome, right? There are 2 of us. This is great. This is going to be a lot better. It really is. Yeah. Like if you're putting like your back into it and like you're giving it your all, like you're tired. And it's good to like share the load with somebody you respect and find funny.
So that's what we've learned from the beginning of our conversation. These collaborations can work. They can work for a long time, and they can be fun, and they can save your life during the middle of a pandemic when you're trying to do an anthology series. I'm going to pass on to our next moderator, who is Sarah Fahey, and she's going to be talking to you a little bit about the business of putting together Roar. Everybody that we've talked to was excited to learn how this very unique show was put together. Great. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Hi, I'll just start with a disclaimer that I am with both my kids alone today. So if little people are roaming in the background, I did force them to put clothes on.
We understand it.
Thank you. Awesome. So we'll start right at the beginning with just sort of how did Roar come about? Like, did someone bring the book to you, or did you have a pile of things you were kind of, I heard that you guys both agreed.
Bruna Papandrea brought us the book that she had already optioned, and she shared an agent with Liz.
Yeah, and Bruna is she produced, for people who don't know, she produced Big Little Lies. That was the one we were the most aware of at the time. And she had the book, and she and Nicole Kidman had already agreed to produce it together. And she came to us, and we read it and responded, and then we had a conversation. And she also intimated that Nicole would be interested in being in one of the episodes, which was exciting. And then we, basically came up with, I think we'd written, when we went out to pitch it.
Liz and I are people who don't like to, I say this now that we've done the opposite, but like, we really do like to come with a script. Like, pitching without having kind of taken a stab at trying to figure out how to write something is always a little, I don't know, feels a little BS-y when we're, just for us, we're people who find a lot out from writing. So we wrote that first script, Bite Marks, and brought that in as a way of saying, look, we can talk to you about how we translate these, but this is what we mean. Here's one example.
And then we pitched out a bunch of episodes.
Yeah.
And we did that also ahead to our producers before we took it around town. And the other thing we did, in addition to talking about how we would take the book, because again, like with an adaptation, you're dealing with an author, usually a living author, but I guess sometimes not. But we were dealing with a living author. So part of what we had to also do was talk to Cecelia about how we were going to make these stories our own. And many times we were going pretty far afield from what she had written. And we wanted to make sure, even at this early stage, that she was down with like a very different version of her book.
Yeah.
And she was really into the translation, into the fact that like we were making it our own.
And
thing.
she came to the pitch with us, which was great, because then we're like, you hear what we're promising,
which is different from the book.
Yeah, different from the book. And she was very game.
Yeah.
So then was she, so sorry.
No.
So that she was also involved in the show as well, Cecelia, or no?
Cecelia, and again, I feel like this is another pregnancy story where she was, I feel like she had just had
a baby, or was just about to have she was pregnant when we were pitching, I think.
Yeah, and then she disappeared for a little, but we were always sending, she read everything. She read everything, and we treated her like a producer, which is, what she was. So kind of first draft of everything went to her. And anytime we had like a kind of question about like, are we going too far, we would check in with her. But she really from the beginning kind of approached the project with a huge open-hearted spirit, and was very excited that somebody actually was pivoting so far away from what she was doing, but kind of maintaining the intention of the project. So we kind of knew from the beginning we had her on board, because like the wackier, crazier the pitch, like the more she was like into it. Go.
Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah.
So then Apple, having Glow at Netflix, and then sort of this is going to be the next big project for you two together. Was Apple a natural progression because Nicole was already on, or why Apple?
The timeline is actually messier than that, even though it looks nice. Like, we were still making Glow when we pitched Roar.
Yes.
And we had kind of maybe naively thought about it as something we'd be making alongside Glow. That Glow would be kind of our continuing, and that's why another thing that attracted us to an anthology is we again naively thought, oh, this would be a kind of fun, not side project, but like a project that won't take up as much time as a full ongoing series.
I think also just to clarify, like we had a full ongoing series that was a half hour with like 17 characters at the center.
It took up most of our year.
And when we thought about an anthology, which I feel like at the time it was like we were at the beginning of season 3.
Yeah, it was a very dreamy idea. We're just like, oh, it's just like you write some plays, and we all of what we've just already
talked about,
downloaded was very,
we were wrong.
We were wrong about, but and Apple, I think, was maybe a natural fit for the project more. I mean, we are very grateful to be at Apple now, but I don't think we were looking around saying like, who would be a good fit for us? I think we were thinking, you know, we have this kind of prestige-y, big ideas piece. And I think that Bruna had actually already been talking to Michelle Lee at Apple, who was really in love with the book, which
always helps.
With any project, like whoever loves it is usually the best fit, because that's somebody who sincerely wants to get it made, wants to help you get it made right.
Yeah.
So kind of having Michelle's buy-in is what made Apple feel right early.
Yeah, like she really got it. She really got us. It was also, when we pitched it, was Apple had not yet launched. So
oh yeah, that's true.
That was, you know, like just to say like the actual
Morning
shape of
Vision
things.
even-
No, we hadn't seen anything that Apple had made when we were pitching for. So in terms of timeline, because we were because they were like, you know, you'll see when it launches.
Yeah,
so it was like was very early days.
Which also, yeah, now that I remember, because we were kind of, or at least I was around Genji's world and Genji's building at the beginning of Orange is the New Black,
and it sounded similar.
Which was similarly like come with us into the unknown at Netflix, which was a very kind of, she was, I think, a baller and, you know, a pretty a visionary who was able to see potential in technologies that I think we also thought about, oh, that's cool. It's like, who doesn't want to be at the kind of the early building, days of a thing that you're excited about and that has all the tools to be good at it.
Yeah. So I think that
so we didn't know whether we'd be a good fit for Apple because there was
it didn't exist yet, which was exciting for that project, because it felt like this project was very it was kind of wild, like it didn't feel like other things, and for us we were like, oh, the idea of building like discrete episodes, you know, right after we're done season building,
will be so
I think we also just felt like it would be a balance, because the idea of holding two full season long shows
in our heads sounded
insane given how much blow took out of us too.
Yeah.
So for each little mini movie, as we're calling them, like you had such big talent attached, like every single, even like the supporting men were like huge. How was that? Was Apple helpful in that? Was that like, how did that come together? I guess is my.
I mean, we had the scripts, so I think it came together the way a lot of things come together, which is like you have scripts and then you run after people, which is what we did for every single episode. And there was a lot of pressure, I will say, on making sure we got talent that was like the bar was pretty high. Let's just say that. And I do think it was one of those things where it was very like we had never, for Glow, we never had all the scripts before we started filming ever. And with Roar, we had every single episode, so we were able to send them to actors, get on the phone, have conversations, you know, rewrite for those actors, and have a process with them because the script existed.
I will also just be blunt and say it's a lot easier to run after famous actors when you're like, hey, Nicole Kidman is doing an episode in this anthology. And by the way, it's like a 10-day commitment where you get an entire story based around you. And we have pretty exciting people behind the camera. And also, here's a pretty insane premise for an episode. If you are someone who likes to come take some risks, here's a 10-day risk with your name on it, was a lot easier than I think other asks in the business.
How involved were the other producers and the net, and I guess it would be the network, the streamer, and Apple in sort of the creative development? Did you get like unlimited creative freedom, it seems, or was there pushbacks?
I mean, I think there was a normal, to be very fair, I have personally only worked at Showtime, Netflix, and Apple. They're all very different places, and I feel like
never once have we received creative pushback that hurt the work or was totally against our own intentions. I think, I feel like
we've always been able to sort of put.
We heard it's out there.
We like a note. We don't
Yeah.
mind,
we don't mind getting into the conversation. We don't mind sticking up for something that we think is really the right way to go, and are happy to go to the mat for it. There are times where, like, I think Nicole really went to the mat for us for the duck episode, which I don't think anyone said no to, but people definitely had question marks and were a little skittish about it. And I think she kind of shut down all questions when she said, we're not doing this episode. I don't know why we're making this series, which, so that was, I think, helpful. But I think that
we've always been heard. We've always been able to sort of,
always just kind of stood up for ourselves, but also love a good note and are usually pretty open, especially hearing the note under the note. If something's really bumping more than one producer, there's probably a reason. So then we'll get on the phone, like, what's going on here? Seems like you guys are circling a thing. Or, yeah.
I only have one more question as far as the sort of business development of all of it, but I guess, and this was kind of, I'm just wondering, like, if there was anything interesting, specifically storyline, that kind of got pushed back or got cut or fell by the wayside, that now in hindsight you're like, yeah, probably that was too, like, is there any like juicy bit of storyline that you're like, okay, that was wacky and cool, and then but we pulled it, or
not really. I mean, the duck sex scene was longer.
okay.
We cut it a bit for length, and that was,
I feel like Liz and I are like, leave it all on the field. Like, we left it on the field. I don't think there's like, there's not like a,
I think that's both like series and season and episode. It's like,
I know, I'm trying to, like, is there a scene? There were some scenes I feel like in Bite Marks that like taught me a lot about when you're making a horror, the type of pacing that's required for horror. Sometimes, like, we had a lot of charming, like, I feel like Jake and Cynthia had like a lot of charming marriage, just banter and moments, and a lot of
that was like amazing.
That was like our that's like in the pocket for the types of marriages we love to write. And then it was like, what's not helping this taut, tense horror movie?
This lovely
this
scene,
like this scene where they're joking with each other in the bed. Including when they were interrupted by their young daughter. For real. I think that's not like, there's nothing juicy about that, just like a kind of, lessons learned when making certain genres. You have to kill certain babies. Yeah, but not
really
real ones.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Liz, who's going to cover sort of the producing and show running, which you've already talked about a bit, but a little bit more into the sort of nitty-gritty with some questions that we have. Thank you so much.
So this has been really incredible, listening to all of these stories. Going on a little more about the cast and the talent that you got to work with, how did you work with such high-profile actresses? And like you said, each episode is kind of a great thing for each of them to sink their teeth into and to have it kind of built around them. How did you do that and also continue the thread of what you were doing for this whole season? Because they do feel, all the episodes feel so cohesive. And they could be, 8 different short films, but they feel like you really put some effort into bringing them together. Can you talk a little bit about working with high-profile actresses while also kind of keeping your eye on the ball of what you are trying to do as showrunners and as producers?
I mean, I think it's about, even with the most high-profile actors, like making sure they're signing on to the project that you're actually making, as opposed to pitching them a different show. I think we were really, when we spoke to each of these actresses, we didn't just speak about their episodes. We talked about the ambition of the project. We talked about the book. We talked about, we were always kind of open about what was happening in the other episodes, to kind of remind them as well, like they were signing on to a project, not just an episode. And I think that, a lot of what we relied on to cohere the episodes is frankly our own voices and the scripts. So I think it was, again, there's, I think there's a way to see it as like, oh, catering to actors and like taking all their notes. But, you know, I think like in any collaboration, even with, you know, very famous people, you have to make sure that you guys are actually making the project that you set out to make and protecting the story that you want to tell. And that starts with making sure that actor is signing up for the right story, you know, that you're not kind of like, you know, pitching them a version of the story that you think they'll want to be in, but that is not remotely on the page or one that you care to deliver on.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, just to say, I mean, it was amazing the amount of talent that was interested in working on this project. And I think the other thing that felt very normal to us, even though it is like a sort of a really crazy lineup, that we were still doing the same things we always do, which is like showing up, being available during rehearsals, talking through questions, adjusting lines, you know, like.
And that's not just for the main character.
It's for everybody.
Always, you know,
yeah,
we're there to be the writers.
So I think that, and you know, every writer on set was like that. I think we were, so like we were playing the same game, and I think it's just, you know, I think that the challenge had less to do with like, I mean, the fact that everybody was so incredibly seasoned was awesome because they're all very, very smart and really know what they're doing. I think you just have a limited amount of time to make sure it's like, am I communicating enough to you to give you what you need, both like about the project and about this character? And you know, it's like you're getting, in a first season, you're getting to know somebody over the course of many episodes. So I think we were lucky in that like we had a lot of people we had never worked with before that we got very quickly intimate with, and we had people we had worked with before. So both in front of the camera and behind the camera, it was a real mix of like new students, like old friends. And that was really helpful in the same way that like there is a shared creative language when you've worked together before, that I think is really helpful. You know, even with a new actor, when you're like, oh, it's an actor we've never worked with before, but our costume designer we have worked with for 4 seasons and have a very close relationship with her. And even just the conversation of being in the mix with Beth and the actor about their costumes was incredibly helpful creatively to like a process of understanding A, who that actor is, B, who the character is, C, what we might adjust down the line, you know, all that stuff was really part of it.
And can you talk about how you went after your directors for each episode? Because the episodes, while they all have this magic trick you're talking about, the magical realism, that they're also like so different. And so I imagine you needed a range of different voices.
Yeah,
we did. And I think we also, this is where kind of some of our kind of agenda and mission, I think, like we did start with, and some of this came from Nicole and kind of her ambitions as a producer, and some of it came from us. Like we really wanted to be able to take some risks and hire some less seasoned directors, or less television directors. Yes. And to kind of give people some opportunities that maybe they wouldn't have gotten, but that this project could be perfect for because of its, you know, anthology nature. And we hadn't gotten to really do that on the writing side based on kind of how fast and how kind of what our needs were. So I think we did kind of have a bit more of a, like our list was a bit more like, you know, where should we put somebody, you know, whose film we loved, but maybe who hadn't had as much chance in television, or like, you know, where do we put So Young Kim, who's like a very seasoned TV director, but who's also directed films we love. Like, where should we smartly be using her? You know, like we have a lot of technical challenges in both the Western and the Shelf episodes. So having somebody who kind of could maybe handle some more curveballs felt kind of strategically smart. But a lot of it came from, you know, who might be an interesting fit with the material, who
yeah, I mean, I think again, like it was one of those things where we also knew we wanted a diverse lineup of directors. And you know, I think because the tones were so, we were playing in different tonal sandboxes, it also opened things up to us a little bit. Like I think on on Glow. I mean, some people I think were a little bit more drama than we were used to in terms of directors, but that actually wasn't as I think challenging for us in terms of like seeing a fit there that maybe it would have been on something like Glow. But yeah, I think it was also knowing that there was somebody who could really handle a beginning, middle, and end narrative. And that was another way that like seeing somebody's film was actually something that like showed me something different that I couldn't always apply to like episodic TV directing in the same way. You know, it's like, oh, we're shaping a whole story that needs to feel like a full bite. And I just watched a movie and it did that thing, and I see how you do that thing. So yeah, it was, and then I think it's just
but again,
supporting that filmmaker in the pace of TV, which is just so much more breakneck than
I think support was the thing we really learned, which was kind of, if we are going to kind of do this grand experiment and then also throw into the mix some people who are kind of newer to the form, what are ways that we can, you know, even just discovering, like, we might need alternating DPs. We might need like 3 extra weeks of prep. We might need some non-consecutive prep. We might need to get real creative about prep with someone who's got small kids coming in from Texas, you know?
Yeah.
And
thank goodness we had like a line producer that we had worked with before.
And who kept spotting opportunities and again, like seeing things down the pipeline when, you know, this particular episode's going to have this really tricky thing. I think we should get a choreographer in really early. And I think the director, even though you guys haven't announced what director it is, I think you should now, because we should start those rehearsals. And we're like, okay.
And I think asking for more, you know, again, it's not just having intentions with directors, it's making sure you're like, you're supporting their process properly, which is also about like money sometimes, where you're like, I need an extra 2 days of prep.
I remember
to bring them on early for this thing, you know, and you're going to need to pay for it. And you have to, I mean, you both need you need to be able to talk to your line producer and your studio about that, and be able to ask for it at the appropriate time. So then the director gets the appropriate amount of additional support. If you want a second unit day and you know that with enough time, then
or just even, I remember like Channing needed to, like she really needed to be in the space. She needed to like repeat scout with the DP to kind of really know her plan, which is something usually in like TV, it's moving so quickly, but we're like, we've learned this about Channing quickly, let's get it built in. It might mean some weekends, and that's okay.
Sounds like it took an incredible amount of forethought to really work.
I mean, our line producer is a miracle worker, and it takes kind of relying on that person, because it was like we both had never made an anthology before, so it would be like new discoveries, but she would still have them earlier than we would, which would be kind of like, we're only filming episode 2, but she's got a real important prep thought about the finale.
And as a creative, you're like, oh my God, I cannot talk to you about this shelf yet. I'm just not there. And she would just
she'd be like, I'm going to show you, if we don't start building the shelf by next week, like
we won't have a shelf.
And
we're like, okay. So she'd say like the right scary things to us, even though like we are annoyingly like, we're like, please don't put this in front of me right now. I can't do it. Yeah. So just to say,
it's helpful when
it's a push pull that benefits everybody.
That is the third person in our marriages. Our line producer who made she with us everywhere.
And how hard is it for you to take off that writer's hat and put on that producer's hat? The way that this was set up, it feels like most of your writing was done. So were you like totally in producing mode by the time you were show running, or were you still like, no, I've got to go back to the script. I can't look at that.
I think we both have a kind of ability to be wearing both of those hats at the same time. And I think if anything, the danger is the producing hat getting stronger than the creative hat. And then you're like, solved all those problems, and you're like, wait a minute, oh wait, we forgot, like that was one of the founding things of the script. Hold on, let me go back and try to rethink how to save that thing. But like producer Liz and Carly just solved it
and killed the theme.
So yeah, I don't think it's difficult for producing hat. I think the harder is that like once you put your producer hat on, like you're really solving shit, and then you gotta like I think the danger is overpowering the other half of it.
I think that's when it's good that there are two of us, because we also hold on to different things with different degrees of caring in the script. So I do think if somebody comes in to like solve something and crushes like somebody's dream, usually one of us will find a way to fight for it.
And also, like, I think that's been the game of TV. I remember since being a staff writer and figuring out like how to, you know, make a schedule work. Like, so much of TV is about like, you can't do that location, but within these constraints, you have this location in 3 days. What can you do? So like, if you love that scene, how can you put it in this location? How can you, you know, how can you save the thing you want? That actor is literally not available on Fridays. So, you know, there's always constraints. And I think that the game has always been, what can you do within the constraints?
Right.
I don't think it's too new to be like, oh, now what? Now that I'm a showrunner, you know, I think it's been at least for, I think, me just coming up through Genji's world, like I think I've always luckily realized that that's the job of the writer, is not just to walk around with the first version of the script and say like, if it's not this, then we're not being pure to the idea. You know, I think that's a very kind of
right. That flexibility is so important for a showrunner.
And is the game. Like, if the episode that you make at the end is the episode you make, and it will very likely not look like the first draft.
Go back to the adapting process for a moment, because you talked about the diversity that you intentionally went for with your directing staff. Was that the diversity of your cast there in the original stories, or did you find more of it where you could?
It's not there, but only because there's literally
in many stories things are non-specific intentionally. So I think that's the version of like, there's a lot of room for writers.
There's literally, I mean, I don't even think
some
of the stories have names for the characters. It's literally like a woman, a mother, the woman, and I think it's intentionally so kind of the translation, you know, once you embody it in a human, suddenly becomes, you have choices to make that you didn't have when it was kind of more of a fable.
Right. Well, you came up with a great, you know, diaspora in the end. And I do think that you were able to like have this great cohesion, like I said, between these very, very different episodes. Can you go back a little bit and talk more about your partnership and how you deal with pitching? Because I know a lot of writing partners out there are still trying to figure out, like, when we do a pitch, do we script it and hand it off to each other? Do we, you know, like, how do we split that up?
Two very different, I mean, we do write the pitch together in our kind of shared voice, and then we'll like literally divvy it up, being like, Carly, take this section, this section, this section, this section. But then Liz really likes to have a script in front of her. I feel like
I really like to know what I'm saying, and then I can riff. Carly is more of like a bullet points, leave me alone, give me some notes.
I'm really like, can't do it till the day. I know what my area of discussion is, but I really need to kind of feel that like I'm sharing a feeling as much as these ideas. Like, I need to go in there feeling like this is the thing you have to make. It's like, I feel it, don't you feel it?
And I think it's like we're pitching differently now that we're like in a deal. But I remember like when we were pitching Glow in particular, like I remember starting, like it also changes as you pitch, you know, it's like the first day I was like, set every single thing that I remember writing down. And then by the end of it, it's like stealing Carly's lines, doing other things, talking about some other stuff. Like, I think it is also, like as you get, if a pitch is good and as you get comfortable in a pitch, you get to be sort of more yourself. I think the hardest part is when you're pitching and you feel like this doesn't sound like me, this doesn't sound like.
I also think that like what we said about writing goes for our pitches, which is to say, and this is more about pitching as a team, but like if Liz feels like she's inspired and I'm like, oh my God, that's doing a far better job of anything I'm doing right now, I'm like, go, like take the ball and go, Liz. Like I don't care if I don't say a word the whole pitch. Like
and vice versa. Like we've done this for everything. Like you're just like check your ego and do the best pitch, both together and with other people. It's like what matters is the idea is coming through with like clarity and passion and specificity. And I think who like
Yeah.
who does it, who says what,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. We've both done so many different things and so many different pitches that have, you know, that we could detail. But I do think it's like you play to your strengths and then you just try to respond in the moment to what's actually happening.
But yeah, we're not like encountering like Liz. Sounded like Liz said more words than me.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. And we'll be upfront about like what we don't want to do. And like half the time I feel like I'll end up, I remember when we were pitching season 4 of Glow to Netflix, which are like, and those are like some season long pitches. So it'd take like over an hour sometimes to do the whole thing. We were pitching the final season, and in the middle of pitching the end of the show, I started sobbing, and I expected Carly to like jump in and save me, or somebody to jump in and save me.
I was like, this is doing better than anything.
And no one jumped in and saved me.
It's beautiful. Like, see how moving this ending will be? Liz can't even speak. So I just sat there quietly being like,
and then just had to pitch through the tears.
yeah.
So you can also have a partnership like that. We were like, somebody's going to jump into this ocean. Nope. I'm going to keep swimming through my ocean of tears, pitching the end of our show that no one ever got to
Wouldn't
see.
dare interrupt.
Yep.
A sobbing.
Yeah.
Right.
So, you know, the like feeling out the room goes a bunch of different ways.
Yeah.
Love that. That's such a great story. It sounds like a wonderful marriage. So
we're pretty happy.
I'm hoping, and you don't have to talk about this, but I'm hoping, because there are so many stories and you've only done 8, that we're going to see more stories at some point.
Yeah.
But other than that, are you guys looking for, you know, what you came into Glow as, let's just write a pilot together, you know, and kind of fell into show running together. You talked about that. Now you are partner showrunners. Have you talked about like, what is our next project? What's our mission? What do we want to look?
Yeah, we're surrounded by some of our next missions right now in this room.
Yeah.
We can't
if
see
we
it.
turned the computer to either wall covered
You'd
with
see
whiteboards, you
whiteboards.
would see some things.
I think we know. I think it's both one of those things where it's like it's harder. It's hard. We definitely know what we don't want. We don't always know what we do want. I think we have a pretty like the like it's like Carly said before, like the Venn diagram of what like really interests both of us is narrow. But when we find it, like we know.
We're developing 2 things currently based on books. And I think that we are. Yes, I think the biggest difference in how we talk is not let's write a pilot. Now it's like let's find a world. Let's like find a world to live in. It's kind of the
because we have lived in worlds for a long time.
Yeah, and
we know what it.
And you know that when you're pitching a show, you're asking to creatively live somewhere for a long time. So it should, the same burden should be on you when you're like, do I want to live there for a long time?
So you're hoping to go live in one world for a long time and not find another anthology.
Series everywhere. We're kind of like, you know,
we're not pitching any more anthologies, I will say, but we are working on 2 limited series, but they're season long limited series. And I think
we want to live in a world.
We want to live in a world. Yeah,
that's not this
one. Yeah.
Well, we can't wait to see what comes next. I am going to bring Natalia back on to handle the Q&A, because I know that there are people who've been listening this whole time and dying to ask some questions.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Do that. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for spending your Monday afternoon lunchtime with us. So I'm just going to go through some of these questions. What advice do you have for newer writing pairs on how to handle when you both get stuck?
Take a walk.
Yeah, we do a lot.
Walks are really good. I feel like you got it, like banging your head against the wall is something we don't do well.
It's not so different from when you yourself are stuck. You just have to both be honest about the fact that you're both stuck. And then sometimes you have to get, I think the real, in terms of like where it feels really different is when you're alone, you allow yourself to have like some of the worst, stupidest ideas, and then you have to get really comfortable doing that with someone else, like lying on a couch saying like, okay, this is not remotely it. I don't think this is just see, is there anything in this idea?
Yeah.
Like this is I think this is total garbage, or like
It's like sharing your bad ideas,
sharing your
always like
worst
shakes us out.
ideas, and also just kind of like, again, not being embarrassed and being vulnerable, but that you're like, okay, I don't remotely have it. I just have this feeling of like, wait, what about, can we just watch this? Okay, let me show you this like YouTube video I watched last night. I think there's something here. And then lying there being like, no, I think you have to just really share, worst ideas, craziest ideas.
And then sometimes it'll be a thing where like we'll take a walk, or we'll be like, let's just, many times if we're really stuck, we just stop working. And then we go our separate ways and come back with like fresh brains too. Like, I think it is one of those things where,
and it's a lot of like forcing the other person to really articulate things. Like a lot of times Liz will be like, okay, I know you keep saying you don't want to think about this thing, but I'm pitching this idea again, because she can't understand why I'm saying no so many times. And then it's kind of like, in finally being forced to articulate something, you get somewhere where you're like, oh, okay, then we'll pivot this way. Or, you have to really communicate and not shut down or not,
It's great to hear that yourselves as such seasoned writers are going through what every writer does when they're faced with a page. So
we just wrote a whole pilot that we read, and
then we're like, nope,
throw it out, start.
We're like, this isn't working.
Yep, here we go again. Back to the beginning.
Pilots are hard. Everyone
Writing
should
is
know.
hard.
Writing is hard. Pilots are hard.
Yeah.
So this is a long question, so I'm going to try to parse it as best as I can, just because I want to get it right. I mean, people have been sitting like through the Q&A and like really excited about their questions. So I'm going to just start from the middle. Hopefully this is okay with this person. What advice do you have for fellow dramatic writers who are trying to get to the level where we're attractive staffing candidates for bosses like yourselves, but are getting stuck at the bottom of the ladder through no fault of our own? And to preface this, this person is responding to the fact that you did have a lot of upper level writers, and for obvious reasons that you talked about, but that's their question is like, how do you break through and like move forward? And I know both of you went through like arcs from staff writers on shows up. So can you talk about that a little bit in the world today?
Yeah, for sure.
To say Roar is the total anomaly from how we usually build a room and what we will probably do in the future. Like I'm curious if COVID changed things, but I'm really hopeful that writers' rooms will still continue to have opportunities up and down.
I think
experience ladder.
I think they will.
I think and I think they need to.
I mean, in terms of like
something I'll say, which is I'm going to just start hitting it from different places, but like it's funny because we were talking about what we were looking for Roar, which was like, we kept making jokes like the full package, they should have everything. That's not what we're usually looking for, especially when we're staffing a room and looking at a staff writer. Like, we're not trying to find someone who can do everything. We're trying to find someone who's good at something, and that something has something to contribute to our room. Maybe somebody's got like, wrote a killer pilot and then we met them and they're kind of quiet, or somebody who like we met them in their interview, they were like, like ideas were bouncing out of them, but like their script was a little weak on character. That those aren't red flags to us when we're meeting with younger writers, because we're not expecting that. In terms of how to break through, I think first of all we'll say like we fully see the value in like starting on a staff and kind of working your way up. I think there's a trend in TV right now, which is kind of, you have a show and you have a show, and a lot of people are being thrown into the showrunner position without having kind of gone through kind of the, or having ever been in a room. And look, there are people who figure it out, and there's probably value that I'm overlooking, but we're definitely in the camp of like, it's a really hard job, and there's a lot of blind spots that you might have had you not kind of understood how a writer's room worked, seeing how what it takes to be in a healthy one, seeing what can happen and send it into a bad place, and you don't want to kind of replicate.
I think there's also
still not answering your basic question of how do you break through, which is like, I don't know
There's no, I mean,
Sorry.
obviously there's no perfect answer. If we had
Yeah.
it, we would 100% give it to you. I do think there's also, I mean,
Oh.
people have different, sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go.
What I will say, like, not everybody is right for every show, but like finding the shows and the creators that you really love, that you really connect to, that you think that you're like in some type of a like my voice, that show, that's a fit. I think chasing those shows rather than chasing everything is really important, and being able to articulate why you love a show so much, because we definitely respond to people who like love our work and love our shows and can talk about what they really like on that show. That's already going to help kind of like winnow down the field a bit, which is kind of like, there's some great, right, this person seemed to really connect to what we're doing, seemed to really, as opposed to like they kind of connected 20 different shows, we're one of them.
Which is both to say, like, be open to lots of different opportunities, but don't be afraid to be really clear about where you think you fit. I think that is, I think sometimes like we're so hungry to work, or staff, or find a job that you're like any staff writing job, which I really respond to. But also there's something about really understanding that like if you're on the right show, you will have a better time in the room. You will have a better time with ideally like, writing a script and making that, transition make sense. I remember when I was first starting the staff, I didn't have a TV script, I had a play. And I read every single pilot that was going to series. And I remember telling my agents, like the two I thought I could write for, having read everything, was Mad Men and the Untitled Edie Falco Project. And they were like, well, one of our clients is the Untitled Edie Falco Project showrunner, so we'll try to get you a meeting on that show. And that was either like the stupidest thing I'd done, so I was like, here are two. But if you have, if you can kind of focus your reps as opposed to having them kind of blanket submit you and being like, please chase this one thing, please get me a meeting with this person. Like, even if you don't staff, or even like, it's
I'm gonna take you back because like I'm sure some of the people asking these questions may not even have reps. So it's like,
but I'm saying if you do have reps, don't be afraid to focus them in a really intense way, as opposed to, because sometimes I think people are like, oh, as long as you submit me to as many different things as possible, that's the best, as opposed to being like, hey, you agent, chase this person hard and get
even if they don't have
way.
a show, like I'm obsessed with J.J. Abrams, like please just get me into that world. Like all I want is, take a meeting with them and maybe they'll have a show coming up. You have a better chance of learning what shows they have if you get in the building and they start like, talking about their development slate. The other thing that's been really helpful for that we've witnessed is, and this happened on Nurse Jackie, is that the assistants really like banded together and supported each other and formed they formed a writers group, and they were really supportive of each other, but also very strategic with how they used the writers and us, knowing that they were going to want to ask us to read something, but also knowing that like, you can't ask a showrunner to read something and then 2 months later be like, I rewrote it, will you read it again? But that probably was not a strong strategy, is kind of like coming in. So they spoke to us at the beginning saying, look, we're forming this writers group.
We're all writing pilots.
At the end, could you read our work? And like, we'll make sure the scripts are like where we want them to be. And I think that was...
And we did a room for their script. Like we all read their scripts and we all gave them feedback.
The whole writer's room.
And they are all working
now.
They all staffed. They all but they really did. Mm-hmm. They did support each other as they all, it was a real all boats rise kind of a situation. And they were very like respectful of each other, respectful of us, and then like did the work. So
that's a great, that's like a multi-part answer, and those are all great strategies, I think, for writers that are.
It's a hard,
it's a hard question because it's like there's there's a lot of luck that's also behind it, and there's a lot of really, I'm sure, unfair overlooking going on.
Yeah.
So I don't.
But I
I
do
think-
think, yeah, the more you can also reach out to, I think, and Carly's always said this, and I think it's great advice, like, if there are people that you like, if there are shows that you like, tell those people you like their shows. Like,
Even if you're not asking for a job.
yeah, just
Tell
like
the people you like that you like their work.
yeah, I've never gotten a job from Pamela Adlon, but like when I was like, I love your work. I was like, I would like to talk to you one day about your work. Like, it's just so good to have those conversations, because out of that can grow other things. And it's also just good to continue to articulate as you're chasing things, like what excites you, because you have to hold on to that too. And people do look for that when they talk to you about jobs.
I think that's a great answer. And there are a lot of strategies in there for people to use and really effective. I guess we have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to just take one more question, which is, how was Glow supposed to end? I think we're all wondering and sad, and
We should pick a new question, because we can't.
you can't answer it.
Yeah,
So
it's like there's a lot to say. You'd have to get Carly really drunk, which doesn't happen.
Okay, so next time we see Carly somewhere, get her really drunk and have her answer that question. I guess, like, for the kind of final thing, I would love to know, I just watched the duck episode last night, and I would love to know, in terms of directing it, why you decided to direct that episode specifically. That seems like a really huge challenge, multiple duck wranglings. What came over you to decide to direct that as your episode?
Carly was like, you should do it.
Yeah, let me put on my producing hat for a second and say, as one of the producers of Roar, as we were talking about what we were looking for in a director for that episode, it was like one of those moments where we're describing Liz, like, she's right here. She's always wanted to direct. I think this would be in the pocket in terms of like where her strengths are. And sure, there are some challenges, but this would be a challenge for any director to figure out how to direct 8 different ducks and figure out where to put the camera. So Liz, it like made sense in so many ways. It felt kind of like a duh. How did we not see this sooner? And there were challenges, obviously, such as like, oh, I guess I'll be taking these meetings alone while Liz goes and preps her episode and then leaves the next day for Australia. Merritt was an actress who we are good friends with, who we love, and who is, it felt like knowing her both as an actor and as a person would kind of, again, for especially such a kind of, it's both a very intimate story and a story that, we're shooting very quickly. So having that kind of personal relationship felt like a huge strength. And I think from the beginning of Duck, we knew that kind of it couldn't be treated like a stunt. It had to be kind of, we had an ambition for that story, which from day one was always to tell the story, of a very specific type of abusive relationship. It just happens to be a duck who seems very charming at the beginning. And I think, you can always catch a director up, but as writers and showrunners, we've been talking about this episode for months, and you're kind of like, who better to kind of protect that and to come at it from the right angle than one of the people who's been on the inside of this conversation for so long, and who's been kind of really thinking about camera a lot lately and thinking about scenes like a director, even though you haven't actually jumped in yet. But I was one of the few people who knew you were thinking like that. So it felt kind of like, well, go apply some of that.
Yeah, it was also one of those things where, like, when we were making Glow, I had said I wanted to, but it was always so hard to step away. I never wanted to step away from the writer's room, and I never wanted to step away from producing. And not that I did here, but because the scripts were finished, it did give us at least one thing for me to not have to step away from in the process. And we were already kind of time sharing responsibilities on the episodes anyway. So that part of it, I think the hardest part for me was, directing.
Not showing up to 114 degrees.
Exactly. Not showing up to part of the Western because I had to go prep, Duck was
hard. Yeah.
Hard.
Well, it's a beautiful episode, and I feel like you really nailed the tone. It is so intimate. It is really powerful and moving. And so we don't have any more questions, and we've taken up plenty of your time. Thank you so much. This has been so great, this conversation with all of us, and we really appreciate you coming. And hopefully you'll come back again when your next series happens. And congratulations on Roar, and really looking forward to what you do next. And thank you. Excuse me?
Thank you guys so much.
Oh, thank you. And thank you again to the Writers Guild. Thank you again to the Diversity Committee and all your hard work putting this together, to the Committee of Women's Writers, and everybody who came to join us today. We really appreciate it. And have a great day. And thank you again.
Bye, guys.
You guys.